Welcome to Paranormal M, your portal to the world of ghostly and mysterious tales. Subscribe and turn on notifications to follow our newest spine-chilling adventures. Embrace the thrill of the supernatural. It came through the phone. Back in 2021, my husband and I went on a couple's trip with a group of 8 other friends to the mountains of Gatlinburg, Tennessee for the weekend. We drove the 4 hours, made it to the cabin, got all settled. While we were waiting for the last couple to arrive, who were bringing their kids, we ended up deciding to not wait, to go out to dinner about 20 minutes up the road from our cabin. We took 2 cars, me, A, my husband, M, L and J in mine, and Z, E, D, and C in the other. Z, E, D, and C left ahead of us. We trailed behind. I was driving a 2011 Subaru Outback at the time. My phone was mounted on one of the cabin fan blowers. We were chatting, having a great time, just catching up, listening to music on low. Halfway to the restaurant, we get a call from our friend Y. I turned the music off, I hit accept on the call, with everybody in the car yelling their hellos, and all of a sudden we hear a woman screaming, crying, and pleading. She's saying, "No, stop, don't do this," with more crying, screaming, and begging as we immediately fell silent. Everybody in the car flies into a panic. Me and my husband scrambling to put the phone on speaker, everybody yelling out her name. Then the screaming cuts off, like the call ended, and our friend Y comes through the phone, calm and collected, with a, "Hey guys, we just made it to the cabin." We're all still yelling. We're asking her if she's okay, and she responds in sort of a confused voice that they're all fine. Apparently, they just made it in. But they did need the door code. We explained to her that we just heard crying and screaming. We thought she was getting murdered or even attacked, to which she let us know that, no, we're doing just fine. Her kids aren't freaked out and they're doing great. We give her the code, finish up the call in shock. We all heard that. It sounded too real. Y's never played games like that. The rest of the car ride, we're all freaking out and trying to rationalize it, to think of what or who that could have possibly been. In the parking lot, explaining the weird occurrence to our friends who made it there before us, an ambulance drives by itself with a siren and lights on, back the way we came. Our winter trip to the cabin. Me and 4 other friends had been working hard at our small community college. We wanted something to do over winter break. We ended up finding a cute little cabin on a lake up near Orient, Maine. After much fuss from our parents, we put our money down and started getting ready for a road trip. Keep in mind, this was before the shift from MapQuest to the common use of GPS and TomToms. Before my cell phone was attached to my hip, you could say. We found directions on MapQuest, set off on our first taste of freedom in a while. We packed into my friend's small red Acura. We drove the 8+ hours from Connecticut after our last college course around 2 p.m. Looking back on this, it was a horrid idea to pack 5 kids into a small car in the middle of winter and drive in the northern states. It was cold and dreary the whole ride up. That wet and cold that sticks to you. The driver, we're going to call him Jay, was in love with his Acura. He had very strict rules for driving, gassing it up, and stopping. So we settled into the car for a long stretch of driving and blasted some music to pass the time. Further north we got, the music, the roads just became. Or rather, further north we got, the weather, the roads became. The further north we got, the weather the roads became. I said that 3 times, but that's what they wrote. Neighbor dog, beautiful. So, we became very nervous about icing. The further you get up into mid-Maine, the further the distances between exits and no lights. Just the moon and the stars. Looming pine forests line the 2-lane highway. It's a sparsely populated area. Tiny little towns miles off the highway peppering the landscape. Because of this, we agreed to make one long food stop only. For dinner, delicious Taco Bell, before heading into a more desolate area. During dinner, I made the rookie mistake of getting a giant Sprite, but made sure to use the bathroom before we left. We continued on into the night. Infrequently, I spotted glimmers of light from little homes and towns pass from the passenger seat after a couple of hours. There came a point I really had to pee, and when I mention it, it's usually at like the last minute. It was an imminent nuclear-level disaster, if we didn't stop soon at least. There were no signs for a gas station on any of the last 10 exit signs for the past 40 minutes. I was ready to pull over on the side of the road. It was beyond painful. My friend driving was paranoid and refused. He said something didn't feel right. It doesn't feel safe to stop. Now, I'm usually very good with sensing strangeness, but I was so distracted by my body mechanics that I didn't give a shit. Pressed my eyes shut, drummed my hands and fingers, just started singing with the music and pleading to whatever could hear me, anything to help distract me. As if the universe heard my plea and I'd manifested it myself, the next exit had a small sign for a locally owned gas station. Perfect. After a little bit of protest, I let Jay know his car would soon be baptized in my urine. We pulled off and drove another 10 damned minutes until we pulled up to this tiny, I'm talking 500 square foot max, dimly lit and decrepit gas station. Nothing surrounded us for miles. There was a large paved area that surrounded this small building, seemingly to make it easier for larger trucks with small trailers to pull around the back. A dumpster sat at the back left by the trees. No lights in the parking lot, just light from the silver of the waxing moon. Inside the shop were 2 green fluorescent lights. They barely reached the 2 old pumps outside. It seemed like the darkness was encroaching on the sickly-looking gas station, ready to swallow it. The moonlight didn't seem to touch it. The creepy feeling we had all started to talk about was getting stronger. We chalked it up to unfamiliar territory, and the fact that it was dead of winter in the middle of the night. I teleported out of the passenger seat and inside, barely getting out the word bathroom. That's when the tired middle-aged attendant slowly reached for the keys and tossed them to me, not saying a word, just sort of crooking his hand and pointing to the outside corner of the small building. It was in the dark to the back of the building. My stomach got that quick anxiety pang. I strongly remember having such an uneasy feeling about going back there. As I ran back out the door, he demanded everybody come back and stand outside to wait for me. For safety and company. My boyfriend obliged, and the others understandably stayed in the car. I rounded the corner, and as I did, a brief double take as I saw someone standing by the dumpster. Just a dark figure. The moonlight reflected off their desk, short hair and what looked to be fur-lined coat. The urge to pee was too strong for me to just care about that in the moment. I felt reassured hearing my boyfriend's footsteps behind me. I struggled to unlock the door. As I made it inside, I fumbled for a switch. Much to my delight, I discovered there was no lighting as I started to relieve myself. Fantastic. I called through the beat-up metal door for something, anything to light up this closet of a bathroom. I left my phone in the car cup holder. I hear a small shuffling sound. To my imagination, it was just everything was running wild, bugs crawling around the walls, bumping into spent toilet paper, I don't know. A person standing in the corner. My boyfriend at the time thankfully had a flashlight. He was in the military, always came prepared. I didn't lock it, so he poked it through the crack in the door. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness at this point. I remember seeing the treetops, a starry night in all of its beauty, some dark mass by the dumpster again. Through the crack before clicking on the light, which was which blinded me. My sixth sense, for lack of a better term, was starting to become more prevalent. Now that I started to get physical relief, I kept telling myself it's just an unfamiliar area in the dead of night. But I felt like an overall unwelcome, and I felt the need to rush. I remember that unwelcome feeling vividly. I recall my boyfriend had asked if I was almost done. I replied I wasn't even close. I heard some talking getting closer. Sam, the other girl on the trip, made a comment along the lines of, "You see that? Who would be outside at this hour in the cold?" I hear her boyfriend say something like, "It's 10 degrees outside, there's no way." Another strange voice came through the door. It was the gas station attendant coming with them. I learned later that Sam had decided to go pee too since we were stopping. She saw the figure as well. She went inside to tell the attendant about someone outside. She mentioned that he didn't respond, but came out from behind the counter. As I was finishing buttoning up my jeans, feeling a million times better, I swear I heard a breath in my ear, as corny as it sounds. It just went, Even though I had this deep pit of fear and unease growing in my gut ever since we arrived, in the moment, I convinced myself it was just me shuffling around in this dirty-ass tile. Though I know I did not move my feet. Dirt crunching softly does not sound like a human breath. Even as I type this, my whole body's chilling up. I immediately raised the flashlight up to the mirror that was fogged up with age and soap scum. No one was behind me. I was ready to hit the road and get the fuck out of here. Flung the door open, booked it through with my boyfriend Sam and her boyfriend. Oh, and the attendant. They were standing a bit hunched near them. Odd. I scanned the empty pavement. There seems to be this lingering darkness hanging around the forest line where it met the parking lot. I turned to the dumpster and no one was there. Should have been reassuring, but it ended up freaking me out even more. I think we should go, Sam. Do you really have to pee? I asked. I remember she looked uncomfortable. They all did. It was like the attendant was trying to block us from rounding the corner to get to the front of the store, or keep us in the area so something could sneak up on us and attack us. I got that threatening feeling. In hindsight, maybe he was trying to make sure that we didn't trash anything. I heard Jay start up the Acura and gave the attendant a wide berth. He wasn't saying anything, he wasn't looking at us. I swear the darkness that seemed to be devouring the light from the shop earlier was emanating off of and around him. You know when you can just tell somebody who has bad intentions? Everything seemed to me like it was time to go. Sam, and everyone, picked up on the hint, rushed to the pumps, piling into the car as fast as we could and pulling out. We laughed about it once we were about 20 minutes away, down one of the main freeways. Made it to the cabin and enjoyed our first night there. The second part of the story was the next day. We bought some snacks and cereal, and after fucking around enjoying the frozen lake and watching movies all day, we quickly realized we needed more sustenance. We had asked one of the neighboring cabins if there was a town around where we could get supplies and food. The neighbor told us about a Walmart or someplace up Route 1 in Holton. The populated town was almost an hour away. The neighbor said just drive straight for about 45 minutes and you'll be downtown apparently before you know it. It was later in the evening. The sun had gone down and we all piled into Jay's Acura again. Me in the front seat, my boyfriend right behind me, Sam and her boyfriend next to them. Jay was super nervous to drive. Temperatures had gone from single digits to negatives. The wet had turned to ice in some areas. But we made the slow and steady trip up to Holton, got our supplies, and made our way back to the cabin. Halfway there, around one of the bends, he saw a person on the road. No distinguishing features, according to him. Jay had started to panic. It slowed down and turned the car to avoid them, but ended up hitting a patch of black ice. Next thing we know, we're spinning out of control slowly off the road. I remember putting my foot up on the dash, my hand on the ceiling as we hit the telephone pole with my passenger door. We descended into a snow-covered ditch, mostly unharmed, discovering later as we were told by Good Samaritans that we were 10 feet from landing in a river. Jay mentioned why he started swerving, to which he told me there was absolutely no one on the road. We were incredibly lucky. We weren't the only car to slide off the road in the last 24 hours either. There's a tan Mazda van about 30 feet to the left of us that had also shared a similar fate the night before. They, however, had landed in the water, but they did still survive. Poor Jay was beside himself with heartbreak due to his poor car and the damages. Thankfully, there was a body shop in Holton that could help. He swears, based on what we were telling him at the car ride up the night before, that something had followed us, or attached to us. He was adamant it must have been the person from the gas station. We didn't see what he saw. Maybe the attendant cursed us. Maybe it was just bad luck, but we were grateful nothing more came of it. We ended up doing a little seance and prayer that night to try to detach whatever energy seemed to follow us. Had no issues during the remainder of the trip. We aren't friends anymore, but I do have a female attachment that I've had a couple brushes with in the past, and most recently last year. Very well written. Fantastic. Missing objects suddenly appear, and things appearing. So, to start off, I want to give a layout of the bedroom and the basement area. The basement has a porch when you first enter from the outside. To the right is a hallway that has 3 rooms. A bedroom, a food storage room that we also kept recycling, and lastly, the laundry room. The bedroom had a dresser with a mirror to the right as you walk into the room. The bed was across from it in the middle of the room, and there was other, smaller dressers. The first strange thing that I had happen in that room was my plush, very vibrant pink headband vanished into thin air. Had it on my head to keep my face mask out of my hair. Took the headband off, placed it in the bed. I came back from my shower, it was no longer on my bed. Tore my room apart looking for it. Got my mom to come down and help me look for it too. There was no sign, it literally was like it vanished. Next morning, I got up and left my room to go to the bathroom. When I came back, the headband was on the floor in front of the bed. The second thing I had happen was something appearing on my dresser. Earlier in the day, I had nice coffee. Put the cup in one of the other recyclings in the room across from mine. That night, I had left my room to go to the bathroom before I went to sleep. My iced coffee cup was sitting on the corner of the dresser by the door. Thank you for reading. Please share if you've experienced anything like this before. I also want to share only myself and my mother. We were in the house during both these events. She slept upstairs, wouldn't have been able to do this. Experienced something terrifying after using an old evil eye bracelet. I, a 22-year-old female, had a very horrible experience about 2 or 3 years ago. My boyfriend, a 22-year-old male, and I had been dating for less than a year when this happened. My partner's of Latino descent. I'm white. My boyfriend's family are believers of the Mal de Ojo bracelets, or in English, the evil eye. They taught me that the evil eye in their culture is used for protection, like if somebody gives you a bad look or if they look at you with bad intent or envy. They then taught me that if the bracelet becomes lost or broken, that means that the bracelet has done its job and protected you. My partner and I were hanging out one day at home when he came across an old evil eye bracelet that used to belong to him. He had lost the bracelet sometime before. He asked me if I wanted it. He said that it would be, useful for protecting me. And from what I understood, someone can gift you their evil eye bracelet, and it should still protect you, even though it did have a previous wearer. I accepted my boyfriend's offer and decided to wear the bracelet, but I didn't really believe in that stuff. I grew up Christian and I still believe in God to this day, but I am fairly religious. I went home later that day. I was living with my aunt and uncle at the time. My aunt and uncle are very hardcore religious, and so their house felt beyond safe most of the time. I never got any bad energy or negative feelings there, nor did I ever experience anything bad or paranormal. That night I went to bed wearing the bracelet, nothing really in my mind. I don't know how long I'd been asleep for and what time I woke up, but I remember waking up screaming and thrashing. I can't remember any previous nightmare or dream prior to waking, but as I was waking myself up with my screaming and thrashing, I swear I felt something grabbing my arm. The arm that I was wearing the bracelet on. I remember that I was grabbing my own arm as well as my other hand, almost as if I was trying to reinforce my other arm that was being grabbed. I think I had managed to shake off whatever was grabbing me at the time because as I was really waking up, I suddenly felt something at the end of the bed. And with a hard tug, I tried to rip the blanket off of me. I held onto my blanket firmly, and eventually let go. I laid there in the pitch-black darkness with my eyes wide open, just staring at the ceiling until I felt it was safe enough to grab my remote control that turned my LED light strips on and off. I turned on the lights. I saw nothing at all. Stayed awake for maybe 10 minutes just looking around and being on my phone. Fell asleep again, and I don't know how I was able to, but I did. With the lights on, of course. I'd never ever experienced anything like this, and there's no way I could have been asleep or dreaming still. I distinctly remember waking up screaming and thrashing, absolutely feeling something. Now, I don't know if something's been attached to that bracelet or if it was just a crazy coincidence or not, but it was terrifying. I didn't feel comfortable going home the next day to sleep in my own bed again. The bracelet remained in my home, but I had taken it off to shower, didn't put it back on. I never experienced anything like that again, even though the bracelet remained in my home in the jewelry dish. I too have an interesting story about these bracelets. Seeing unexplained things as a child. I grew up in this eerie old house. Years later, I found out my parents experienced things they couldn't explain. Nobody liked living there. The place had a bad energy. We moved out in 1999. This story takes place when I was 8 or 9. My brother and I used to share a bedroom, and from my bed I could see the hallway and my parents' bedroom door. One day I woke up in the middle of the night. It was dead silent. Everybody was sleeping. I swear I saw 2 creatures standing by the door. It was dark, but I could see their silhouettes. They were short and chunky like dwarves. It's the best way I can describe it. I could hear them talk loud and clear. One was very bossy and told the other to check on my brother and me to make sure we were sleeping. We walked to the foot of our beds, checked on us, and went back to the door. I wanted to scream so bad, but in my head, if I did, they would kill my family. I was so scared that I fell asleep, so I don't remember if they had a conversation or what happened next. But I do know what I saw. I know if this can be considered, I don't know if this can be considered paranormal, but it's definitely something I can't explain. And I told my parents years later. They believed me. Apparently they weren't surprised, and like I said, they also experienced weird things while living in that house. I never experienced anything similar again. We moved to a new house, and whatever those things were, they stayed behind, luckily. Haunted bedroom, or spell, I don't know. I'm telling you something really weird that's been happening for a few days. For some quick context, I used to be somewhat of an occultist. I've studied a lot of texts and practiced a lot of stuff. I left that life 10 plus years ago. I asked for my third eye-related gifts to be closed. I lived with my girlfriend. That's while not initiated or studying the occult, really sensitive, having a very strong intuition and seeing things from time to time. Because of that, I taught her some basic things for self-preservation, shields. Now for the tale. We suddenly felt an oppressive feeling in our bedroom. She started seeing figures everywhere pretty clearly. We left the room and stayed outside. The yard had around 10 figures, very different from one another too. She told me that there was a very well-dressed man, with a sort of Men in Black feeling, but fancier. Some other, therianthropic figures too. Inside there were 3 or 4 meter tall hooded figures in another room, not giving us any attention. Just looking at the window outside. I lit a candle, did some invocations and prayers, taught her a couple more self-protection mantras. Soon after, that oppressive feeling was gone, but the figures were still there. She put her phone in her bedroom door and recorded the audio. It was weird as hell. At the start, we can hear some distant conversation and sounds as if it was like at a dining table drinking and cutlery sounds. But here's the thing. We live in Brazil, and from what I could identify in the audio, it wasn't the Portuguese language. From what I researched, it seemed like Romanian or Creole. From the research, it seemed like a gypsy funeral, if it was Romanian, or a woman telling somebody to go with God and a man saying goodbye, if it was Creole. And curiously, the audio was immediately silent. We live in a rural property and there's always some kind of bird or animal, but there was only silence for almost 8 minutes. After that, I tried a few more rituals, but she still was seeing a woman figure in the room with a somewhat deformed face. Like half of her face, actually. The figure tries to touch her, screams in her ear. Nothing we do seems to work and we're sleeping in the living room. I'm running out of ideas on what to do, really. My experience of seeing a ghost in my room. So I'm a pretty scientific person. I don't know how ghosts could ever exist. It doesn't make any sense. But I also think there's a lot about the world that we still don't understand. So anything is possible, I guess. I can only talk from my own experience. Anyways, I was 10 years old. Every night I would fall asleep with the light off, but with my TV on playing a videotape. I remember there was a period where I'd always get a little scared of shadows on my wall, and sometimes it would feel like there was something there. I would ignore it. Then one night my cat Sid was sitting on the edge of my bed. He was not a friendly cat, would never really let anybody pet him without scratching you. But I could hear him purring. I was under the duvet with my face turned toward the wall. I could see that shadows were moving on it. I started to feel like something was behind me, and I felt terrified. I knew the only way I was able to shake the feeling would be to turn around and look. I mustered up all the courage I could, pulled myself up and around, looking toward the end of the bed. I saw a little boy wearing dungarees with curly, messy hair looking at me, smiling. In hindsight, he seemed very harmless, but this terrified me. Fear, I threw myself out of bed and swung my door open. When I looked down the hallway, I could see my parents' armchair rocking slowly back and forth in the darkness. It was as if somebody was sitting on it. By this point, I was in absolute terror. I knocked on my sister's door and asked her if I could sleep in her bed. In the morning, I woke up still in her bed. I hoped it was a bad nightmare, but my sister told me I'd climbed into bed with her because I was scared of something I'd seen. I've never seen anything like that since. But a year later, I learned that there was an old dilapidated house at the end of our driveway that was built over 100 years ago. The furniture and Christmas tree still sat in the rooms untouched. I've always wondered since then if the little boy might have lived there once. He lived very rurally. There are no other houses around us for miles. Sometimes I think I made it up in my head, but it still seems so clear. Encounter in Cranbourne, Victoria. In mid-2005, I met a ghost cyclist on South Gippsland Highway in Cranbourne. I was en route to Devon Meadows, but still at least 10 or 20 minutes away from there. It was between 4 and 5 a.m. and extremely foggy. I could barely see, and I don't know where exactly on the highway I was. But in a nutshell, the ghost went backwards on his bike until he was sitting on my bonnet. It was made of a kind of golden light that I could see through. I could see that he was a thin man, but not what his coloring would have been in life. He stretched his hand through my intact windscreen, seeming to want me to take it, which I did. The hand felt spongy and very strange. The ghost vanished soon after that. But this encounter seemed to open up a portal. I was haunted by other spirits for the rest of the morning. I've traced this encounter to an accident which occurred between 4 and 6 a.m. on a winter morning, 1989 or 90. I have some conflicting details from locals, but the basic ones are the same. The victim was riding his bike to work, having lost his license. Very early in the morning, he was hit from behind and killed. I've been given 2 first names. One person says James, another Jason. I don't have a surname. He was killed in front of or near the old Cranbourne Meadows Tech, now Lyndhurst Secondary. He was apparently a very kind man with a sad background. Late 20s according to locals, but the TAC site said he was in his 30s. Ghost cyclist encounter in Cranbourne, Victoria 19 years ago. I finally traced the cyclist encounter to an accident which occurred at about 5 a.m. on July 2nd, 1990. The victim was 25, due to turn 26 in August. His name was Jason. He was riding his bike to work, having lost his license. He was on his way to Cole's warehouse in Hampton Park. It was very early in the morning. He was hit from behind by a red Ford, though some locals seemed to think it was a truck, and then he was killed. He was rather a lost soul and had a sad background, but did have some good friends. He spent a lot of time on his own despite this. When I met him, I felt like he wanted to comfort, maybe my help. There was a lonely, sad feeling about him. One of Jason's friends kindly gave me information about Jason's life and death, as well as giving me his identity. Other Cranbourne locals have been assisted me in piecing all this together. The only cyclist fatality that ever occurred in all of Casey at that time of day, according to TAC records. The records were not accurate with respect to Jason's age, though. I know that because I've seen a photo of his grave, which I've since visited. His friend also told me that TAC just used initials and estimates from the accident scene to sort of record the age of the victims. I've been told that others have seen my ghost cyclist as a rider in a fog who then vanished. I believe he probably reached out to me because we had certain commonalities, on top of my being there on a foggy winter early morning, much like the one that he died on. Also, I was 26 when I met him, nearly the same age as he was at his death. We were about 15 years apart in age, and, well, it may even have been the 15th anniversary of his death when I met him. My client saw a hand. I work with adults with disabilities, so take the story with a grain of salt. He would talk about seeing a girl with no mouth around the house. For example, when he couldn't find his hat, the girl with no mouth would take it. One of my responsibilities was checking on him when he went out to bed each night. I had assisted him to bed and left him with the CPAP mask in his lap and stepped out so he could get it on, get comfortable. I had left his light on and his door cracked so I could just sort of peek in and turn off the light when he went down the hall. I was about 10 feet away looking at the bulletin board and I started to hear his laugh. Curious, I looked down to see what was laughing. Then I poked my head in and he said, "Caught ya." "What?" "I caught you." "What'd you catch me doing?" I didn't want to worry him, but in my mind I'm just thinking all I was doing was reading about the company picnic or something. He said he saw a hand reach into the crack of the door, turn off the light, and he thought it was me playing with him. Here's the thing. Well, his light was off. He hadn't moved. His mask was in his lap. He was still sitting underneath the covers in the same position, same spot. He hadn't moved and the light was off. I had to flip the switch to turn the light back on. I personally only had one experience there. I was in the living room watching a movie. The work was done, everyone was asleep, paperwork done. So I'm just killing some downtime, keeping myself awake when I hear this crash from around the corner. Around the corner is the dining room. In the dining room is the kitchen table, and on the other side of the room across from the entryway is the client's bedroom. My first thought is he's gotten up and he may have fallen, so I hurried to check on him. I get to the entryway and I can see his room still closed. I can see it through like a figure though, like standing in the dining room by the table. Figure that turned to look at me. Its right side was to me, then it turned its entire body. It looked at me and I could see through to the other side of the dining room. I could see all the way to the client's closed bedroom door. That's the only experience I had at that house. I've heard from over the night staff that they replaced me, that they heard whistling. The rest of this I could just excuse. He had cognitive impairment and my eyes were playing tricks on me. She heard whistling from outside. It sounded like it was from the dining room. His light was off and I purposely left it on so I could do my job, a bit later. He was cognitively impaired, but he didn't see things. He had trouble with his memory, but he, didn't see things. That makes me wonder just how much of the others are real. Hey ghost, no means no. Don't touch my butt. I lived in an old house in Denver, built in the 20s. Added on a bunch, so it kind of was a hodgepodge of architecture, and none of it was really amazing. Just a series of boxes. The original footprint of the house was somewhere around 600 square feet, had a crawl space. The add-ons gave me sort of a small basement with a cellar and an opening to get into the crawl space. I had the sweetest Pomeranian. When I had to start carrying him down the back steps so he could potty, he was clearly struggling. It was time. I held him in my arms to the vet, kissed his little head as he left. A couple of days later, I kept seeing a little black squidge going from the cellar to the furnace room. That was as I was, working in the basement. My little buddy was coming for a visit. A few days later, I had to go to the crawl space so I could run cable to the small bedroom. I climbed into the little door, tools in hand, grabbed the cable, and low-crawled my way to the opening to the small bedroom. Pushed the cable through the reversed course. All of a sudden, a feeling of petrifying menace rolled over me, and I felt like something was inches away from my face in the darkness of the crawl space. The only light coming from the cracks outlining the cellar doors and the small door leading back to the basement. All of a sudden, the light from the cellar door disappeared. I started low-crawling with whatever was there inches, prone from my body. I just kept telling it that, I was leaving. Just leave me alone and let me go. I promised I'd never come back there again. It followed me all the way to the door, and I gracefully sort of slithered out of the tiny opening in the floor below. Stood up and slammed the door in the crawl space and instantly felt better. And just for the record, I sleep naked. Whoever writes this is kind of weird. Months had passed since my sweet boy died, so I decided it was time for a puppy. What a fortunate series of events, I wound up with a beautiful lab mix. He hadn't had the best life up to that point, was super clingy, so I'm in bed, and he had starfished. I'm hanging by it like a thread, and he also stolen blankets and sheets, so my naked butt's sticking out in space on my little edge of the bed. One night I'm dead asleep, and I wake up with a hand trailing at my leg. It stops long enough to give my butt a good honk and trails up my back and is gone. I look over and take attendance. Husband is in bed. Dog is in bed. I look into the bathroom, which is in the direction the phantom honker would have gone. Empty. We moved a short time after, and the new place has a mystery room behind a little office downstairs. My dog frequently stares off into the darkness when we're down there. But so far, nothing overt. Other than butt touching, apparently. Being haunted by my very alive husband. Curious to know if this has happened to anyone else. Going, into too much detail here, but I used to live in a house with my ex-partner who was emotionally and verbally abusive. He made the house extremely tense. Fits of rage followed by days and weeks of silence. Most of my friends stopped coming over because of the energy of the house. You could feel tension just when you walked in. I was pretty used to it, being his wife. I had my first occurrence in the first house that we shared that was a late 80s Cape Cod. I moved in after we got engaged, but for the first 6 months everything was great and normal. Sometimes my dog would bark incessantly at the end of the hallway at nothing in particular. I'd pick up on some old house creaks. Eventually we got married and continued to live there while looking for a newer home. When my husband started a night shift job, things changed. While still in Cape Cod, we began to argue. He would follow me around the house yelling at me until I solved things by apologizing and catering to him, and we'd move on. His attitude became hostile, and I began my career of walking on eggshells. Things were fine as long as he was happy. He was happy as long as I had meals made, clean house, brought home money. Didn't see my friends, let him do whatever he wanted, left him alone, didn't look upset or unhappy. Didn't talk too loud, too quiet, didn't move too much in my sleep, did his laundry, color-coded his clothes, and when I put them all away facing the same direction. Didn't try to talk to him before dinner, right after dinner, and definitely not in bed. You get the gist. Yes, he's a giant dick. The first night I saw the shadow figure, I was home alone. He was working. I woke up in the middle of the night with him on the side of the bed holding what looked like his cell phone. I could see his shoulder outline in the screen from the phone. I was surprised he was home early, but didn't want to make him angry and asking about it, so I pretended to sleep. After a few minutes, he hadn't moved at all. I reached to grab my phone and I checked the time. 3-something. Turn over to ask him if he's okay, and he's just standing there looking at me. I could see his outline, his ears and shoulders. It was like he was darker than the darkness. He was standing there. My fight or flight sank in, and I immediately took my pillow and threw it at him. Grabbed my phone and ran out of the house. No one had broken in. No one was in there. I didn't sleep that night. Fast forward a year to this new house. I mean new. My ex had money, so new Ryan home cookie cutter built for us like a residential neighborhood. At first, little things would happen, lights on and off, TV acting up, all ignorable. It had become worse and harder to appease and harder to understand. The silent treatment would last weeks, and there would be such an intense tension from the two of us that it was like heavy. One night at 3 a.m., our fire alarm, in our bedroom only, went off. Later that week, my girlfriend and I were in the living room and we heard running upstairs coming from no one. I have no kids. My dog's always glued to my hip, and my ex was sleeping. Things went on like this. Lights would flash on and off, and items would move around or get completely lost. The TV would come in the middle of the night, come on in the middle of the night. And also our house was struck by lightning twice. Towards the end of the marriage, when his abuse was bordering on violent, I saw his shadow again. He had had some sort of fight the week prior, and he had pulled silent treatment ever since. Again, he was at work. I woke up in the middle of the night to footsteps at the foot of the bed, and when I opened my eyes, the exact same shadow was on the same side of the bed. The odd thing this time was it was definitely him, but he had short hair. It looked like the shadow of him from our time at the older house. My ex at that time had grown his hair out to his shoulders. I knew it wasn't him. But it was him, staring again from his side of the bed. My sleepy, worn-down best, I ignored it and went to sleep. It felt like it wasn't me that thing was directed at. I wouldn't say I felt safe with it, but I just knew that darkness wasn't mine, if that makes sense. This is way longer than I intended, but is anybody familiar with being haunted by the living? That's a more interesting concept than normal. I like it. I'm not really a believer in paranormal, but I've seen odd things happen in my house ever since my grandpa died. My grandpa died in the year of 2011 to lung cancer. We were close, and he often would teach me stuff like fishing and fixing different things like chairs, tables, and doors. He also taught me wood carving, which is something I still do to this day. So some paranormal things have happened a couple of times to me. The most common things are my door and the door leading down the stairs to the second floor of my house slamming shut for no apparent reason. This happens with no other doors besides these two doors, and this is so common it happens like 2 times a month. Second most common thing is a weird sound. I hear it at night. It sounds like somebody is very quietly coughing outside my room. It's odd since my mother and sister live downstairs. My grandma lives in a second apartment connected to the main apartment, so realistically nobody could be there. This happens once a month at least. Third most common are the black figures I've seen a couple times. One just today, which made me make this post. They're always either near the door leading downstairs, the one that sometimes slams shut randomly, or the second apartment where the grandma lives. It's always the same. A tall black male figure walks behind a corner and disappears. My mother said that she's seen it once or twice as well, but my grandma hasn't. This has happened like once a year. It's something that's happened to me once when I was 15, 6 years ago. I was in the kitchen at around 1 a.m. at night making myself some food. I was hungry. I heard the downstairs door slam shut close behind me, which startled me, but I was kind of used to it at this point. But then suddenly, I saw the doorknob turn and the door open again. Then I saw a black dog-like figure appear from the door with glowing white eyes. It looked at me before it just disappeared before my eyes. Like it just faded away. I have no idea what that was about, but it freaked me out badly. Never has happened since. Another once-in-a-lifetime thing that happened was about a year later since my grandpa died. I was around 9. It was again late night and I was pouring myself some water. That's when I saw something on the window. It was a white face-like thing that just appeared on it. I stared at it in fear until it just vanished. Like the dog from my other paranormal encounter. I've often heard weird screaming-like sounds from the woods around me, like that foxes have been sighted by me and others around here, so they could be the culprit. Lastly, my grandma once told me that she felt somebody lay beside her during the night. She assumed it was me or my mother, but she was so tired that she didn't bother to ask. Next morning, she got up and noticed no one was sleeping next to her. She did, however, notice the picture my grandpa had fallen down from a shelf for no apparent reason. She later asked me if I had been there, and I hadn't. My mother also denied visiting her. So yeah, what do you guys think? Still kind of skeptical about the weird black dog encounter, especially. I just can't explain to myself. We have a dog, but the black dog was tall and looked tall and more like a sheepdog in its shape than our dachshund, so yeah, I'm confused. Lifetime of unexplained things. I'm 37. I was born in Poland. I moved to England in 2011. In my adult life, I look for logical reasons and explanations to everything. Keeps me safe and sane. That's because at a certain point in my teenage life, I had to start telling myself that things that happened aren't real, and eventually they stopped. But still, whenever there is any mention of paranormal, a fear like no fear a person can explain takes over. It's embarrassing. It's not logical or reasonable to me, but I immediately get goosebumps, a cold shiver of dread up my spine. Since my earliest memories, I've experienced darkness. Till a very young teenage time, I had dreams of drowning in oily darkness of war, of burning cities and people dying. I had dreams of shadows in the forests, demons luring me. My parents had a hard time because they would find me out of being hiding in a different room crying on the floor while asleep. My first very confusing experience was when I was maybe 7. Older kids took me to the basement where they tried a ghost invocation, using a glass tied to a string. I only remember that they asked some questions and the glass exploded and we ran in fear. Months later, I remember waking up at probably 2 a.m. and I felt frozen in bed. I had my cover over my head and I saw 2 ghastly figures just walk through my bedroom. I was too scared to move. But eventually, when I peeked out, it was morning and sunny outside. My dad has friends who were into occult stuff. He used to take me there. I was an 8-year-old, telling them how incredibly smart for my age I am. Probably too smart. I haven't had any experience except dreams until I was a teenager. I wanted to hike in the forest around my town. Never happens when I was with someone. When I'm alone, especially on a hike back there in the forest in Poland, I always felt something looking at me. The darkness between the trees was darker suddenly. If you went into the forest, all sounds would vanish. One day I remember I got brave enough. I always try to shrug that fear off. I ventured into the ancient forest. It was so wonderful, almost magical, that I found myself in a dark part of the woods. I saw a random lonely staircase in the distance. Then I found a clearing, and there was a big old dead oak tree. Everything around was quiet. The ground was dead. I remember I stopped going out on hikes alone. And when I was 17, one of my friends who was so deeply into history, World War II, wanted me to go with them to a forest hunt with a metal detector. There was a place a fairly long hike away from our town where at the beginning of the century there was like a lake and a German restaurant. All of this area was once German before the war. There was a prison camp and ruins of an artificial petrol plant built by the Nazis, all in ruin, cordoned off due to possible mines or not detonated air bombs. I've been to that German restaurant spot many times before with school, my dad on group hikes. That day was different. My friend found some nice old china plates, coins, and things, but I remember I couldn't settle. Felt all the time we should hurry. I still remember it was such an old feeling. I remember I finally convinced my friend to just pack away and go. When he was almost done, we both heard a very low bass-like rumbling, like a heavy machine gun or drums or both. Couldn't be any truck or nearest roads maybe 2 miles away. I remember it was getting louder. We both panicked and we both ran. We got back the same way and we saw a few trees that broke and collapsed. There was no wind and we both asked each other how did that happen. Those trees were okay before. Eventually, we were out of the forest, sprinted to a nearby village, and suddenly we felt safe. But the first thing we saw was a herd of goats, a large goat with the most diabolical of horns, exactly the ones you see on those weird satanic books. I remember that we fully jogged home 8 miles not talking. We never talked about it after. From that moment, I tried very hard not to believe in anything paranormal. But I always had those chills come back, those moments of absolute anguish and fear when I was alone. Maybe that's why I moved to the UK. Here, nothing happens for a long time, until recently, when I was just at the end of a very toxic relationship. At nights, even when my partner and I were sort of feeling something was not okay. Maybe because although I wasn't in a relationship, I was alone and lonely. In the last year of the relationship, things happened to have varied from being uncomfortable to downright scary. During COVID, I rescued a dog. Literally the light of my life now. Always around, I feel safer with her. But where I lived back then, things happened in a very open small park near my house. My dog was younger, she wasn't very good in holding her pee throughout the night. I would take her to that park. It was literally 100 meters away from the home, after 8 or 9 p.m. for a quick one. There was and is a lamppost at the far end you can see clearly when you enter the park. 3 times out of nowhere, a hooded man, I think, appeared standing under there, looking directly at me for the entire time I was with my dog. And immediately when I saw him, it was the same fear crawling up my spine. Last thing happened 3 weeks before I moved out. My ex moved out early, and it was early January 2022. I took my dog out around 9:30. For obvious reasons, I avoided the park and took her up an old pathway nicely lit by streetlights and houses. But it was all different. There was this thick fog outside, reflected all the lights, giving everything a red hue. Everything was dead quiet. No cars, no people. There was always some people out and about, but no sounds from the houses. I remember what stayed in my mind was how it all felt like a padded room. But I walked up the streets with my dog, and before we even got to the near end of the houses, there was this horrible screech like something was being ripped apart while still being alive. It lasted for a good 30 seconds. My dog cowered like mad, and she almost ripped my shoulder out because she ran home. My dog doesn't mind fireworks and loud noises, but she was absolutely petrified, and so was I. Even after getting inside the house, nothing felt okay for a long while. I stayed up that night for a long, long time, until I was too exhausted to be awake. I've not really told those things to anybody for the fear of being judged as crazy or ridiculous. But I'm going crazy. Were those things just a figment of my imagination? If yes, why do I get so scared to the point of crying just remembering them? I'm a grown-ass man. I'm not afraid of the dark at night, but I'm afraid of the darkness and the feeling of darkness. That makes sense. Have you ever had premonitions? This is a question from my crazy head. I've mentioned about paranormal experiences, but something's been really bugging me for a few days. I had to do a probably full life memory reconsideration. What I'm asking is premonitions. I want to know if you experienced them. And I'm asking about it because on this post Thursday, I've been unfairly let go from work due to whistleblowing regarding deeply unsafe practice. That happened very suddenly. I had no way of knowing about it. My premonition happened on Tuesday evening, before I reported anything. Before anything happened at all. In fact, I had an amazing day at work, and when I got home, I immediately had a full depressive breakdown of crying and being deeply unsettled. I was confused and disturbed. I had no reason for that, and I'm not bipolar. I felt deeply unsettled. Something's going to happen. Before that, I had a similar soul-breaking feeling a day before my estranged parents had died 2 years ago. But I had a motorcycle accident. Well, that was before. Before that, weird and unpleasant things happened. I remember the strongest one was when I was 21 and I was taking a bus to see my boyfriend at the time. In that 1-hour bus drive, something fully told me that this is the last time I'm going to see him. While feeling absolute dread, too. Lo and behold, he dumped me within 5 minutes of seeing him. Came out of the blue. We didn't have any arguments before that. So many examples, and it's weird. Well, weird that I actually had to think about it and realize, yeah, that almost always happens. I don't like that. Why does it happen? Camping in my backyard for a couple of months, and there's something outside my tent on several occasions. I enjoy sleeping outside. I have my tent in the back corner of my yard, up against the woods. Usually around midnight I go to bed, step outside, and my motion light brightens up the yard as I walk about 40 yards to my tent. I'll be on Reddit or listening to an audiobook, YouTube, Netflix, whatever. The first night I was out there after setting up my new tent, I was relaxing when I heard scratching near the door of the tent. Very funny, good one, now let me sleep, I said. Then off a bit in the distance, I hear both my teenage sons laughing. But the next night I hear coyotes very close. They frequent the high-tension lines just up the hill. I hear them often enough, but this time it sounded like it was happening in my backyard. So I sat up, shut off my audiobook, and hit record on my phone. It was awesome. It gave me chills just because it sounded so close. I could hear each individual coyote. It sounded like they were attacking one of the pack anyway. The next night I hear them again, but much further away, and an owl who hauntingly hoots most nights. Later that night I hear scratching again. I tell them to go away as it must have been 2 a.m., even later maybe. I fall asleep. Same again the next night, but by now I know it wasn't my kids. I told them to stop the first time, and me having terminal cancer, they do what I tell them now. Some nights, going to my tent, I see rabbits in my yard eating grass. Nocturnal rabbits. We have raccoons, possums, squirrels, flying squirrels, fisher cats, and other things. I figured something was brushing against my tent every night while grazing or whatever. One night it was so loud it sounded deliberate. I sat up, turned on my electric lantern, and looked toward the noise. I see my shoes bouncing up and down on the tent floor. My fucking god, it was mice this whole time, or a snake, or something that was comfortable beneath my tent. But last night was different. I hear scratching again, and this time on the opposite side where there's not even a door there. That's where I'm up against the woods. It was definitely not an animal, as it was much higher and repeated a pattern like scratching a record, so to speak. I say out loud, "Leave me alone." I said that as I slapped the side of the tent with the back of my hand. I could either hear or feel footsteps on the wet grass. Moved away and brushed up against my head and arm and stopped there. I had this pressure against me and I was scared. After about 15 seconds, I felt it slowly move away and stop, probably a foot or two away from my tent. It was weird to hear myself say loudly, "The power of Christ compels you." Couldn't think of something better, it just kind of came out and it seemed to work. Wanted to go in the house, but I was too frightened to open my tent and break for the porch. Turned my audiobook back on, but turned the volume all the way up. Somehow fell asleep. Tonight I'm sleeping in my bed. Tomorrow I'll go through the video on the bird feeder camera that might have caught something. Being a skeptic, I will assuredly make more excuses on what it could have been, but I was so damn scared last night. Perhaps one day I will be a believer. Feeling a loved one near you. Has anybody ever been doing something and you suddenly feel a loved one nearby? It sounds ridiculous, but I just threw up because of some dodgy food. While hugging my poured toilet bowl, I had the overwhelming presence of my Nana. She raised me from when I was 8. I'm 27 now. She passed in early 2023, and I was the one who found her, peaceful in bed. Since I was a child, I always would cry when I was sick. I couldn't help it, just proper sobs while throwing up. I'd always think I was dying or done something wrong to deserve a simple tummy bug. Not due to her, but the parental neglect that, she saved us from. It remains the same. 10 minutes ago I was being sick, crying alone, wishing she was there, and it felt like she was here again, rubbing my back and telling me I'd be okay. Stop crying. Wiped my tears, and I said thank you as I left the bathroom. I still felt a hand on my shoulder until I made it to bed. Genuinely felt like she was here with me. There's been a few times I felt like she's nearby, and I've always been chalking it up to my trauma from finding her. What do you all think? Something has been in my back for years. So I don't know if this is really paranormal, but my entire life something has been on my back. I can remember it being there, my entire life. Never really noticed it much. I mean, I grew fat, so I assumed it was a lump of fat, which I hear is possible for some people. I also assumed it was simply a deformity. A winged back or something seems logical, and it's not even unheard of foe and spine also to be like sort of bow-shaped weird at birth. But here's the thing. It moves. It doesn't hurt, it just moves. I'm also able to push it inside and out. It seems if I move my arms back, I can feel it inside of me, and it's hard to put into words. I only noticed this all because after so many years I lost weight. But here's the issue. My chest. It's still built like a truck, and worse, after losing weight I noticed that there's also a lump on my chest. I tried to feel it, so I kept pushing it, and now my chest and my back hurt. So what's in my back is 100% in place of everything that should be in my chest now. I don't care about paranormal or ghost. I assume it's a parasitic twin. I could get an x-ray, but I'm honestly terrified. Not even half scared, but I pretty much ignored this entirely. Wait a minute. How can you be honestly terrified and not even half scared? It feels sharper than I thought, like an elbow or something. It has an underneath, but one side of it feels like it's tissue or some shit close to the armpit. It's hard to describe. I don't work out either. I've got x-rays done before or something different. The lady didn't tell me what it was. She said they're not able to tell patients and what's on the x-rays. She said that she didn't know if I would be able to see it, but she looked. Weird, just weird. She was wearing a mask and I could see she was looking at it weirdly. It was that noticeable. I never found any information. They never got back to me. But the only thing they did was take a lot of blood from me. Why did I go in? Really, it was just a stomach pain. The world was weird and I thought I would die, so why am I here? Because this isn't a health concern. This is something that I feel like is about to burst from my body. I tried to ignore it, but it legit wants to come out. It gave me hell all summer long. I don't know what it will do. I don't know if it's my twin and it's gotten too powerful, but it's out of my control. It needs to come out at this point. It's currently so tall it's stretching out my back the more I lose weight. What the hell is it? Okay, I don't know what's going on here, but I'd like to see a picture of whatever's happening. Good night. See ya.